So I sometimes surf the childfree subreddit. I'm not really active there, but I have had some friends post a couple of stories about me. For those of you who don't know, the childfree subreddit is a community for people who have chosen to never have children, not because they're infertile, but because they just don't want to do it. Personally, I don't really want kids either, but I don't hate people that do. I just think it's a good idea that those who want kids only have them when they're prepared for them. It's a very left-leaning subreddit politically, and that's to be expected. In the past, men not having children wasn't necessarily seen as abnormal, though it was expected that they would eventually have them. However, with women, it has almost never been acceptable to not have kids, and it's really only with moderate second-wave feminism that the social acceptability of deliberate childlessness on a woman's part was even discussed. So the community has a lot of leftists, a lot of feminists, many of them the sane liberal type. But there's a few radical crazies too. At the same time though, there's also a contingent of politically right-leaning users as well. The idea of purposefully not having children is not only grounded philosophically in the second-wave feminist value of allowing women to have control over their own reproduction, but it's also equally grounded in the male reaction to a society that has stripped all incentive to reproduce from them. It's no secret that divorce courts, child support rulings, and custody battles are all heavily weighted against the father. Just like it's no secret that a woman's option to not reproduce has socially never really been available until very recently. Parenting is a biological investment for the mother, but it's a financial investment for the father. And more people than ever, on either side of the aisle, are simply considering the price to be too high. I'm getting into this because I want to establish that the childfree subreddit is bipartisan in its membership. It's not exclusively full of radical feminist women who masturbate to the ideas of the destruction of the nuclear family, and it's also not exclusively full of MGTOW men who delusionally believe that they're a prime target of sperm jacking by any woman they ever meet. But just because the subreddit is bipartisan doesn't mean that it's apolitical. Some people on both sides of the gender argument find themselves radicalized and therefore at odds with each other, despite agreeing on the child-free question. A recent example of this is a thread titled, "I'm glad I'm female because no one will ever have my child without my consent and then force me to pay child support on top of that." The thread is now locked, and it's a perfect example of the child-free political schism. Recently, I read a post on this subreddit where Op's wife had tubal litigation, but it failed and she became pregnant. His wife was against abortion, so she wanted to keep and raise the child. Op decided to divorce and was upset about everyone judging him for wanting to divorce his wife over the child and wanting to avoid paying child support. I was surprised to read the comments below. Many of them suggested that Op was being the shit of the earth for not wanting to pay child support for a child he didn't want, had taken reasonable steps to avoid the creation of, and whose continued existence was being championed only by his wife and his judgmental parents and friends. I understand that people should be responsible for kids they have willingly or irresponsibly created, but in this case, why the heck should Op be responsible and forced to literally pay for his wife's refusal to abort or give up an accidental pregnancy for adoption? Can someone explain to me why, if no one's allowed to prevent me from getting an abortion or force me into getting one, why I'm allowed to force a guy to pay for a child if he's made it clear he doesn't want it, but I made it exist anyway? I don't feel safe about my own reproductive rights if there's this gaping hole in the opposite genders. Obviously, guys shouldn't be allowed to force women to get abortions, no shit, but why should they be financially burdened or obligated afterwards? We give women the final choice in terms of a child's existence, and we just force men to be responsible for her choice either way, regardless of his own feelings on the matter? I feel like men have an obligation to help pay for an abortion procedure since the pregnancy is partially his responsibility, but the continuation of that pregnancy is all on the woman, since she has the final authority over the matter. This is a prime example of what I would like to call the abortion paradox. That if we value equal rights between men and women, we either need to ban all access to abortion or dismantle the child support system, because if one gender has an easy out from the responsibility of pregnancy, then in the name of equality, both genders must have an easy out. I'm going to attempt to present all sides of the abortion paradox as objectively as I can, and let's see what we can make out of it. First of all, we can't discuss the abortion paradox without discussing abortion itself. The abortion paradox assumes that abortion, in a vacuum, without adding other connected problems into the mix, should be a legal option for women. But there's still no consensus on that. Some people are just fine with abortion, some people would never get one themselves but are okay with it being legal, and some people want abortion to be illegal, with that illegality having some exceptions or no exceptions at all. There's a range of opinions. The pro-choice side of the argument believes that abortions should be legal. Their argument generally stems from three positions. A, the equality argument. B, the lack of personhood rights argument. And C, the bodily autonomy argument. The first one, the equality argument, is ideological in nature, and has been described by several feminist authors, most notably Bell Hooks, as the following. If men can have sex without fear of getting pregnant, then women must also have the fear of pregnancy removed from the equation in the name of equality and sexual liberation. This point of view spurred the legality of the birth control pill, as well as abortion access, in order to ensure that no woman carries a fetus to term except the ones that she explicitly wants to. I can't back up this next statement, so take it with a grain of salt, but Dr. Laurie Chambers, the chair of the Gender Studies Department at Lakehead University, explained this concept in her own words in one of her lectures, that even though biological differences in reproductive systems create a disproportionate amount of risk for women when engaging in sexual activity, Dr. Chambers asserted that equality demands that society, culture, and technology fill the gaps where biology fails. The second argument, lack of personhood, revolves around the status of the zygote or the fetus. It's clear that when a pregnancy event unfolds properly, a fertilized embryo eventually becomes a baby with human rights. The pro-choice position is generally that the fetus is not a person up until it's viable outside of the womb, with some pro-choice extremists outright stating that the fetus is not a person until natural birth has occurred. And this is why most countries with legal abortions have a 20 to 22 week cutoff period for having the procedure. Before this time, the fetus is not a person, therefore it has no human rights, and therefore abortion is not murder. The Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion in the US, has a passage that reads, "The state's interest in the life of the fetus became compelling only at the point of viability, defined as the point at which the fetus can survive independently from its mother." Let's discuss the third option, bodily autonomy rights, the right for a person to determine what happens with their own bodies without interference from the state. The pro-choice position holds that a woman has the choice to abort or not abort based on these bodily autonomy rights. The bodily autonomy argument generally takes two different forms. The first revolves around the woman giving consent for another being to draw sustenance from her body. This point of view supposes that just like a woman may choose to breastfeed or not, a woman may choose to nourish a fetus through the umbilical cord or not, as both actions take away energy from the woman, energy which she may desire to keep for herself. And just like a woman may remove a parasitic tapeworm that's suckling nutrients out through her intestine, she can also remove a zygote that's suckling nutrients out through her uterine lining. The second form of the bodily autonomy argument involves foreign bodies penetrating into or existing inside of a person's body. As a society, we generally view violations of the integrity of somebody else's body as a serious crime. An obvious example is the illegality of rape, but other non-sexual forms of forced foreign object insertion is generally also illegal. For example, tattooing or branding somebody against their will is not only a serious crime, it can even be a human rights violation. The bodily autonomy argument, insofar as abortion is concerned, posits that a woman's bodily autonomy is violated when she has an undesired pregnancy. This violation can stem from her sexual partner, the fetus, or both, and that therefore abortion rights are necessary to maintain her bodily autonomy rights. Notice that the lack of personhood argument maintains that the fetus is not a person and therefore has no rights, while the bodily autonomy argument can be seen as an implicit acceptance of a fetus's human rights. If a fetus is a person and it has human rights, it therefore also has responsibilities. And if we are to take the fetus's actions against the incubating woman as an assault on her bodily autonomy, then that is actually a serious crime on the fetus's part, even if the fetus is doing it unintentionally. We generally do consider unintentional crimes to still be crimes if they're serious enough, even when they're committed by children. In this case, abortion may even be seen as a form of capital punishment against the invader, or hell, maybe an eviction.
It's not up to you to tell Kara what she can and cannot do.
She is carrying his child. He should have some say.
As the lessee, he does have certain rights. Back home, pregnancy is considered a rental.
Rental.
Yes, I used this joke earlier during the Ben Shapiro at Berkeley video. It was too good to pass up. In any case, the fact that the pro-choice arguments use both a fetus's human rights and simultaneously a denial of those rights as arguments may seem inconsistent on their part, but it also may simply be preparedness for any possibility. On the pro-life side of the argument, people believe that abortion should be illegal. Their argument generally stems from two positions: A, the responsibility argument, and B, the sanctity of life argument. The responsibility argument is ideological in nature, like its pro-choice variant. It states that consenting to sex is the same thing as consenting to pregnancy and motherhood. They're linked by cause and effect. Having an abortion is therefore ducking responsibility for one's actions. The sanctity of life argument is a bit more complex. It is generally a religious argument revolving around the uniqueness of humanity and the existence of a soul, but there's also a humanist component to it, where the moral authority comes not from religious belief, but from a reverence for sentient life. It's from this reverence that a non-religious concept of universal human rights also springs. In either case, the sanctity of life argument is fundamentally a moral argument, revolving around the status of the fetus or zygote as a person and therefore having human rights. For example, Some pro-lifers argue that abortions discriminate against people that have been conceived but not yet born, and that abortion advocates do not actually value all human life, only forms of human life that have reached a specific level of development. If we can arbitrarily declare somebody to not have human rights based on their age, why is it 22 weeks of gestation instead of 10, or 30, or 1 year old? It seems rather arbitrary. Some people argue that abortions deprive a fetus of a future that may be fulfilling, pleasurable, or in some other way positive. This argument is the same as one of the principal arguments against murder as well. A murderer deprives the victim of the experiences that the rest of their lives may have held. So too does abortion. This argument often comes in the simpler form of, what if your baby is the next Einstein, referring to the possibility that the fetus may grow into somebody who positively impacts the world in some way. Some people argue from safety, that because we do not know when a fetus or a zygote becomes a person with human rights, we need to assume that all fetuses and all zygotes have human rights, even if it later turns out that they don't, much the same way that reckless behavior that may cause the death of another person is considered to be both morally and legally wrong, even if nobody actually died as a result of the reckless behavior. All of these arguments are derived from the concept of universal human rights, with that universality also extending to fetuses and zygotes and not just already born humans. There's a few other fringe pro-life arguments that we can dismiss right here. Some people claim that abortion causes a post-abortion shock syndrome, that abortions routinely cause infertility, and that even at a proper medical facility with trained staff, abortions are extremely unsafe. None of these are true, and the evidence against them is so overwhelming I won't waste any more time on it. So there we go, we've got the pro-life side, we've got the pro-choice side, and we've got their arguments. And all the arguments on both sides ultimately hinge on human rights. Let's see if we can poke holes in any of these arguments. And yes, I'm doing it to both sides. So if you're currently in the middle of writing an angry comment, at least wait until the video's done, okay? The bodily autonomy argument is probably the strongest one in the pro-choice camp. Even if the fetus or zygote has personhood rights, which person's rights do you prioritize? The woman's or the child's? I mean, a woman can always have more children later when she's more ready to do so. It may sound harsh, but it was often the case in humanity's past, and is absolutely the case in the animal kingdom at large, that a mother will abandon her child in a moment of extreme weakness or danger because at least she will still be alive to reproduce later. It's a sound evolutionary strategy, but there is a funny hypocrisy to it. Most pro-choice people are also pro-vaccination. My experience on the child-free subreddit leads me to believe that a lot of pro-choice people routinely make fun of insane anti-vax Facebook moms. And I'm not anti-vaccination myself. I think vaccinations are obviously a good thing, but let's talk about rights here. Do bodily autonomy rights not also include the right to not get a vaccination? Is a vaccination needle not also a foreign object? It seems to be a huge contradiction to me that people who champion bodily autonomy so much would also force people to get vaccinations if given the chance. And in that same vein, a large chunk of the pro-choice crowd are also socialists or communists, due to the increasingly large crossover between feminist theory and Marxist theory. But bodily autonomy rights are predicated on property rights. Your body is your property, just like your house or your car or your belongings. If society becomes collectivized, where the group owns the property, why do you think you'd still have abortion rights? Why do you think you'd have any bodily autonomy rights at all? There's a reason that abortion rights are a thing only in capitalist societies, because only capitalists recognize property as owned by individuals, and only capitalists view individual rights, bodies and all, as meaningful. The pro-life responsibility argument is also a walking contradiction. It makes no sense to demand that a woman must not take advantage of the latest medical technology and have a safe abortion, and instead must take responsibility for her actions by having the child she's conceived, when the history of human technological development has been entirely based on the objective of reducing the amount of responsibility that people take in their lives. The hunter-gatherer had a greater responsibility to hunt and gather than the farmer had to farm. When humanity started building walls around their cities, the danger of attack by either predators or neighboring humans also shrunk. People could walk around at night safer than before, with less responsibility laden on them to protect themselves. Medicine, transportation, trade, it all serves to reduce risk and increase reward, and subsequently individual people have less responsibility to deal with. Saying that somebody should get an abortion because they should take responsibility for what they've done is like saying you shouldn't pull your parachute during a skydive because you should take responsibility for the Earth rapidly rushing towards you. There's just no reason to do so, and our entire civilization is structured against that idea. Some pro-choice people routinely argue from the exception. That is, they believe that exceptional circumstances should dictate the rules for ordinary circumstances. A common tactic is to advocate for abortion rights only in instances where the mother's life is in danger. From there, this exception is expanded to instances of rape, and then to detectable birth defects. And then, once the door has been cracked open that much, they advocate for abortion on demand, under the guise of protecting women's mental health. This is clearly a disingenuous form of arguing. In no instance, abortion or anything else, should the exceptional cases of a situation become the primary basis for legal statutes. Exceptions to the rule are just that, exceptions. They are not the rule themselves. and an argument for widespread abortion access cannot be based on exceptions. The pro-life position of making abortion illegal comes with a host of other problems. It's no secret that illegally performed abortions regularly kill women attempting to get them. And prohibition has taught us that when the government makes illegal something that the population desires, it doesn't actually eliminate the activity or product. And furthermore, what would society do with a woman who is caught getting an illegal abortion? Would she go to jail for murder? Would the illicit doctor go to jail for murder? If the doctor but not the woman, why not? If the fetus has human rights, how would this situation be any different from a woman hiring a hitman to kill somebody? Surely she would be liable somehow. There's also an argument from consequences to consider. America's downward spike in crime during the 1990s occurred because abortion became legal in 1973, and all of the children of low-income single mothers that would have grown up to be criminals were instead aborted. But most importantly, how would a government even determine if an abortion has taken place? We already have instances of some US states attempting to charge women for murder because those women had a miscarriage and it was later discovered that they had been drinking or doing drugs while pregnant. What if a woman has a natural miscarriage, and she gets charged with murder because she did something minorly unsafe, like drive her car to work, and the prosecutors determined that she had put her child at undue risk? What if women who are not currently on their period are simply legally considered to be potentially pregnant, and are therefore barred from doing any activity that may harm a potential child? Making abortion illegal leads us down a slippery slope that ends with the liberty of women restricted so severely that we may as well be living under Sharia law. And on the topic of whether or not a fetus or a zygote has human rights, frankly, both sides have done a shit job at arguing their positions. On one hand, it's clear that the pro-choice argument is false from the beginning. The fetus may not be a baby, but if the pregnancy is left to its own devices, it will likely become one with time. And if you believe that humans have an innate value, and if you believe in universal human rights, you do believe this, that is reason enough to protect the fetus. Even taking precautions from this point of view is no excuse. Cause and effect still applies. The cause is unprotected sex, and the effect is pregnancy. If you use contraceptives, that's a different set of cause and effect. The protected sex is the cause, and the effect is no pregnancy. And if the contraceptives fail, in that case the cause is failed protected sex, and the effect is pregnancy. The real world still continues around you, regardless of whether or not you consent it to. Moreover, as medical technology advances, the window of viability that the pro-choice position relies on will continue to shrink. What will you do when advanced medical technology can make a child viable outside of the womb at 18 weeks instead of 22, or at 14 weeks, or at 10? What will your reason for the denial of human rights be then? On the other hand, the belief that human rights are granted at the moment of conception is equally ridiculous. The exact moment a sperm cell touches an egg cell, there's clearly no brain to even hold the thoughts of a new person. Many fertilized eggs are naturally flushed out within a normal period as well, as they fail to naturally implant into the uterine wall. Twins can generate from a duplication of the zygote from up to 14 days after conception. If human rights begin at conception, because the point of conception is the creation of a new person, then what is the legal status of twins? They were one person on day 0, and yet 2 people on day 14. Does one twin own the other? If fetuses have human rights based not on their current state, but on their potential to one day be a full human, why do we consider people with irreversible brain damage to still be human and have human rights? Those people will never regain the neurological traits that personhood relies on. Hell, forget the science. A lot of pro-lifers use religious belief as their justification. Okay, let's do that. Leviticus 27:6. And if it be from a month old even unto 5 years old, that thy estimation shall be of the male 5 shekels of silver, and for the female thy estimation shall be 3 shekels of silver. A child has no value if it's under 1 month old. Not 22 weeks after conception, not at birth, but 1 month after birth. Numbers 3:15 to 16. Number the children of Levi after the house of their fathers, by their families. Every male from a month old and upward shalt thou number them. And Moses numbered them according to the word of the Lord. Infants less than again 1 month old are not to be counted as people. Exodus 21:22 to 23. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall surely be punished, according to the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life. Inducing a miscarriage by inflicting violence on a pregnant woman, but committing no crime beyond that, is not considered to be a murder. Rather, the husband has leave to assault the man, and the judges have leave to fine him, but this is not the biblical punishment for murder. It seems to me that even in the Bible, life does not begin at conception. So that's the abortion argument, as far as I can tell. Summed up for you in a nice little package. Well, there was nothing little about it. That was a lot of information to get through. And we haven't even discussed the abortion paradox yet. Let me remind you what the abortion paradox is again. If we value equal rights between men and women, we either need to ban all access to abortion or dismantle the child support system. Because if one gender has an easy out from the responsibility of pregnancy, then in the name of equality, both genders must have an easy out. Hey, now that we've heard it a second time, it sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Oh, that's right. It's very similar to the pro-choice equality argument. If men can have sex without fear of getting pregnant, then women must also have the fear of pregnancy removed from the equation in the name of equality and sexual liberation. And remember our good friend Dr. Chambers. Equality demands that society, culture, and technology fill the gaps where biology fails. As it turns out, the development of the abortion paradox unfolded almost like an arms race between men and women. In a purely biological sense, for the gender of the species that carries young or performs a disproportionate amount of the child rearing, sex carries a larger risk. And when a feminist tells you that's not fair, they're right. It's not fair. It's not how I would have arranged things if I were omnipotent, but here we are. Institutions like monogamy, marriage, the pressure on men to provide for a family, these were all, as Dr. Chambers put it, ways that culture filled the gaps where biology failed. They allowed men to take an equal yet distinct role in the parenting of their kids. But what happens when one of the two parents don't want to be a parent? Well, that's where the arms race kicks off. If the man doesn't want to be a father and simply bolts, leaving the woman holding the bag, that's no good. There's still a child that needs providing for. This is why we invented the concept of child support, so that the woman isn't simply left struggling with a kid she can't hope to raise on her own. And for a while that solution made sense. But does it still? With birth control and abortion an option, does child support still make sense? If we do away with child support, who will help pay for the child's upbringing? Well, to begin with, if the first half of this video has taught you anything, it's that the abortion debate is far from settled. If the prime argument for the abolition of child support is that women can get an abortion, that's a pretty poor argument, considering the ever-increasing number of restrictions placed on abortion in the USA. Even if it's legal, it's not commonly available. So let's assume a reproductively ideal world. In this world, public education is sufficient that everyone knows the dangers of sex. Contraception is available to all people who want it, for free as part of a state healthcare program, and is both easy to get and easy to use. Abortions are in the same boat. In this ideal world, would it be unjust to charge men child support if only the woman wanted a child? Well, some old guard feminists think it would be unjust. A famous quote from Karen DeCrow reads, "If a woman makes a unilateral decision to bring a pregnancy to term, and the biological father does not and cannot share in this decision, he should not be liable for 21 years of support. Autonomous women making independent decisions about their lives should not expect men to finance their choice." And this is a great point. If women are no longer bound to the home and hearth like eras past, but can now provide for themselves and their children with the fruits of their own labor, and every option to bail out of a pregnancy is provided to women, why should we force a man to finance their unilateral decision? This was basically the question asked in that child-free thread from before, and the comments do yield some interesting answers. The courts try not to side with either mom or dad. They try to always side with the kid. The two adults in the situation don't matter. They're adults who can take care of themselves. Kids are vulnerable and at the mercy of their parents. It's not that the non-custodial parent owes child support as punishment for their choice to have sex. The idea is that the child deserves to be provided for regardless of the circumstances of the parents' relationship. The argument put forward is that the child's right to be provided for trumps the rights of either adult. That's not an unreasonable argument. But it is quite convenient that because of this argument, once the contraceptive and abortion arguments are finally permanently settled in the way that the radical left wants them to be settled, that this position will result in men routinely getting thrown under the bus. As it is right now, both genders are getting thrown under the bus, which is equal but bad. And the only ways people are working to improve the situation seem to only be improving women's lot, not men's. The unfortunate truth is that there are biological differences that warrant a nuanced and meandering legal framework in order to have a somewhat fair outcome for the parties involved. What we have right now isn't really fair, but our biology isn't fair, so the law attempts to accommodate. Women must retain exclusive rights to their bodies, full stop. Children must be cared for, full stop. I don't really like the idea of people being financially saddled for 18 years, but right now there is no other reliable system in place to make sure that the children are provided for. Oh, biology isn't fair, eh? Whatever happened to society, culture, and technology must fill the gaps where biology fails. That feminist precept was used to justify birth control and abortion, but once it's men's biology failing them, suddenly biology isn't fair, so we just gotta live with it? What if abortions are made entirely illegal? And you're just told that biology isn't fair? Will you be happy with that? There's a lot of shit that isn't fair for women, I assure you, so I don't have a ton of patience for guys who moan about child support for a result they knew was a possibility going into sex. Shrug. There's a lot of shit that isn't fair for men, I assure you, so I don't have a ton of patience for girls who moan about pregnancy as a result they knew was a possibility going into sex. Shrug. See how sexist that sounds? The excuse of don't have sex if you don't want to pay child support to men is identical to don't have sex if you don't want to get pregnant to women, and we decided that was grossly inappropriate long ago. If you are a man, by consenting to sex, you are basically signing a contract that you're allowing a woman and her body to use your DNA how she sees fit. I'm going to stop you right there. So does that include when you blow your load in a condom and then the girl takes it and pours it in her vag? Does that include that? Does that include women sneaking into sperm banks and impregnating themselves? Does that include underage boys who are raped by their female teachers? You know those MGTOW idiots? Yeah, the male isolationists that believe that any contact with a woman, however casual, is just too dangerous for them to risk? You're basically making their argument for them. The law isn't designed so that women have the right to not be parents. It's designed so that they have the right to say what happens to their body. And the fact that, medically speaking, this also allows women to choose not to be a parent is an unintended and admittedly unfair consequence. Once all bodily autonomy questions have been resolved, what is best for the child is tantamount, in this case, to financially supportive parents. And here is where we get to the ultimate hole in the what's best for the kid argument. Some people advocate for what has come to be known as financial abortion for men. That just like how women can get a physical abortion, men can simply opt out of parenthood, lose all rights, lose all responsibilities, not have to pay child support, and walk away from the whole situation scot-free, just like how it seems that women can walk away from the whole situation also scot-free. But a lot of these commenters in this thread are right when they say that physical abortion for women and financial abortion for men are not parallel concepts. A physical abortion means that there's no child to care for by either party when the deed is done. A financial abortion means that the woman is still left with the financial burden of raising a kid by herself. Even in a reproductively ideal world, even if the man met all reasonable timeframes for filing for a hypothetical financial abortion, at the end of the day, a kid still exists. And therefore, the financial abortion idea is not an equivalent solution to the physical abortions currently available. You know, if only we had a really easy way to figure out this whole scenario. If only women had a way to unilaterally sever all their rights and responsibilities to their newborn child, including the right of financial responsibility, the same way that financial abortions advocate for men. If that were the case, then giving that option to simply walk away from their kids would not only be possible, it would be necessary if we value equality. Oh wait, we do have that. It's called safe haven laws. Safe haven laws allow mothers of newborn children to give up their kids to the government. These children become wards of the state, and the mother is allowed to remain nameless within the court. The mother waives all rights to the child, but is also no longer burdened by responsibility, including financial responsibility. Not only do safe haven laws allow mothers to duck their obligation to actually pay for their child's upbringing, it also provides a vehicle for mothers who may wish to hide the existence of their child from their father, for good or bad reasons, to do so with the assistance of the legal system. This sounds a lot more like a female equivalent of the financial abortion for men argument than physical abortions ever will be. If the law truly prioritized the rights of the child to be provided for by the fruits of the parent's labors over either parent's own rights, then safe haven laws wouldn't exist. Women would not be allowed to simply give up their kids and move on, unburdened with responsibility. But they can, despite men not being allowed to do so, and despite everybody bending over fucking backwards to try and justify that, women can. And do. In the end, I don't think the abortion paradox is about abortion at all. The question, why can't men opt out of child support if women can get abortions, is a nonsensical question, because it's comparing two separate, distinct, and ultimately unrelated issues. The real question is, why can't men opt out of child support if women can opt out of supporting their child? And for that, there's no answer. Maybe it's because society values men's rights less than women's. I mean, women's movements have become legitimized and men's movements have been laughed at. Maybe it's because men generally tend to work harder and longer than women on average, and society requires some sort of incentive in order to keep them going. And if being the respected and loved head of a nuclear family no longer functions as a suitable carrot, then the government is required to fashion a suitable stick to get the job done. Maybe it's because our culture is more willing to accept the idea that a man would instantly abandon his child if given the opportunity than accept the idea that a woman would do the same. Or maybe it's because people just generally don't think of the double standards that exist when women can give up their children but men cannot. All in all, the child-free subreddit is an interesting place. It gets a lot of undeserved hatred from a lot of people who assume that the place exists solely to get off on the deaths of babies or something. But it's not that at all. It's a mostly rational corner of the internet where a politically diverse group of people come together based on their shared desire to never reproduce. reproduce. Some left-leaning people have feminist reasons, some right-leaning people have MRA reasons, but most people just have individualist reasons for not wanting kids. And there's also a lot of overlap politically too. Like I said before, the bodily autonomists are strangely pro-mandatory vaccination sometimes, but there's more to it than that. For example, a lot of people who are normally pro-universal social safety net often like to chastise overbreeding moms who suck up tax dollars in the form of child-based subsidies. In any case, the sub's got a lot of great people in it. Oh yeah, having to pay some fee for a few years is way worse than possibly being forced by stupid misogynist laws to carry an unwanted fetus to term, go through life disruption, the agony, the risk of fucking death. Poor men. Well, every community has got its bad apples. Don't worry, lady. If you just want to baselessly man-hate, there's a ton of Reddit subs out there just for you. It's not hate speech after all.